Are we okay now, Mark?
Just we're live, Chair.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. And welcome, members. Welcome to this strategy scrutiny meeting. It's good to see you all, as always. First of all, substitutes nominated for the meeting and apologies. Mark?
We have no apologies, but we have been informed that Councillor Carr and Councillor Dickinson are running late.
Perfect. That's okay. We await their attendance in anticipation. Okay. Item number two, members' interest. Does any member have any interest about anything upcoming? Nope. Okay then. Item number three. We are live on YouTube. The public. This is a meeting open to the public. Item number four. Minutes of the last meeting held on 25th of October. Does any member have any comments about anything in the minutes at all? No. In that case, can I please propose them as a true and accurate record? Can I have a seconder, please? Yeah, Councillor Carney. All those in favour? Very good, and that is passed. Fantastic. Item number five, deputations. I don't believe we have any for this meeting. I don't think, Mark.
That's correct, Chair. There's been no deputation submitted.
Perfect. And in that case, on to the business. Item number six, the Q2 projected outturn report. Becky, welcome. How are you today?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I'm good, thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, as always, the best scrutiny board in Calderdale. Would you like to? I believe you've got a slideshow.
Yeah, so the report that went to Cabinet, the supporting information was in a PowerPoint presentation. So is it easier? Is that the best way of going through, just showing
Well,
that, or is there?
I've obviously we've all read the report. I've got copies
Yeah.
for it. Well, I suspect members do. Do you want to maybe just highlight any key themes? Anything really want to draw our attention to, and then we can move on to questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think the report is quite clear. It does present the position based on the information to the end of quarter two. So 6 months into the year, where our budget holders and assistant directors and directors look at what is happening in their activity against budget and make a forecast to the end of the year based on current activity and information. And you'll see sort of the two key areas of budget pressure is mainly in children and adults. And this is the same reasons that were reported previously in terms of cost of care packages, cost of the market, and this is a national issue. And there's multiple drivers for this in terms of general cost of living and inflation that are affecting providers' cost, but also the demand and supply issue. So particularly in children's area, the demand for care provision to meet quite complex needs for some of our looked after children and looked after children in other areas of the country is pushing up prices in terms of that market and demand for places and some of the complexity of the need that we're seeing where there is an increase in a ratio of staff to children. So often children's homes that are privately run may be registered for children, but the placements are single children taking up the whole placement, so hence the costs. So there's a general issue with the cost of care, and I don't know whether you've are aware, but I know our children's scrutiny, I've heard from children's that there is quite a lot of activity going on to try and reduce the cost of our care population in terms of looking at promoting the use of in-house foster carers, so trying to increase our number of in-house foster carers, changing and adapting our own in-house residential care to try and manage children closer to home, which is better outcomes. So there is a lot of activity going on within Children's, and I know Children's Scrutiny did do a piece of work to understand the cost drivers and the challenges facing children. In adults, it's a similar position in terms of cost of care and similar drivers, but it's if you look at the breakdown in the presentation, shows that the biggest area of cost of care is in our population of adults of working age, so those with learning disabilities, physical disabilities, mental health, where longer term care packages are needed, and again that the complexity of care, so again demand there. So they're the two sort of the key cost drivers, and generally across the board in other services, we're seeing the impact of cost of living, albeit the budget did make provision for a certain level of inflationary increases. We are seeing the impact of where we've got fees and charges, that, you know, sort of the levels of demand for some of those services for where they do make fees and charges is lower than sort of pre-pandemic levels. So the position has slightly worsened since Q1, but that all of the teams are working to try and identify further actions that can be taken to bring those costs down further, and we're going to sort of, as Q3 comes to an end, we will be reviewing the position to see if there's any more definitive actions that needs to be taken beyond that's already been taken. Do you want to come in now, Councillor Kingston, or?
I beg your pardon, I was going to wait until you'd finished. I was hovering, waiting for you to finish speaking, and my finger slipped. So, speaking, please.
Okay, I'll just carry on, just because part of the report also does identify an update on the capital programme position, and reports new things that have been added to the budget based on some of the drawdown and approval of external funding, particularly from the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, where we've been successful in getting more grant funding for some of our infrastructure schemes. So it just reflects and updates the position on the capital programme as well, to put those into the budget. And finally, it does provide some information on our reserves position and presents, you know, what that position would look like if we get to the year end and that outturn is at that level. And as you'll see, you know, currently we have still got a level of reserves, but we would need to be looking at that as we go into the next financial planning process. So that's a brief summary, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Becky. Councillor Kingston, if members want to also put the virtual hands up, then please do. But Councillor Kingston.
Thank you very much. Now, please forgive me, Becky, because I'm fairly new to strategy and performance. I've only done one previous meeting about budget stuff in strategy and performance, and that was for Q1. The impression I got at the end of that, I think it was from something Councillor Robinson said, was that at that stage it felt fairly normal to have the predicted outturn that we had at that stage, and that usually it's recouped through the rest of the year, and we end the year okay. I think I'm remembering summarising what you said fairly correctly there, Councillor Robinson. However, here we are looking at the end of Q2, and it doesn't look like that is actually happening. There were two things that I noted in particular. One is that we are nearly halving corporate reserves, and I wondered how comfortable you are about doing that, Becky. How usual is it to take that level of action, and what recovery would be necessary because of that action? So that's my first question, or my first set of questions.
Thank you. I might need to bring Lee into this one as well, for just from sort of that historic context, and Councillor Dacre. In terms of kind of that Q1, Q2, it's not uncommon for Q1 and Q2 to reflect a worse position than Q3 and Q4, and by the time we get to outturn, we have often seen those projections come right down. So even though there is a worsened position at Q2, it's not significantly worse overall. Having said that, there is an assumed use of reserves, and within that table of the use of reserves, it is also including an amount that we've already set aside for in the budget process for last year for some use next year. So it's sort of just showing that everything that we know about that either is committed or may need to be committed. But it wouldn't be sustainable in the longer term. However, the reason why we have reserves is to withstand financial adversity, and I think that the sort of the ongoing situation with the fiscal position and the economic position with inflation, the legacy of COVID with some of the health and care needs, it was still in those sort of unstable times in terms of financial implications. So that's what reserves are there for, but they only can be used once. So again, the next round of, as we go into financial planning for setting the next 3 years, we need to be mindful of that, because it wouldn't be sustainable to have that level of usage. But having it, as we sort of set out at the start of the year, there was a sort of anticipation that this might be another turbulent year. At present, but yeah, something needs to be different going forward in terms of getting us to that financial sustainable position. Lee, I don't know whether you want to add anything in terms of that sort of historic position.
No, I find that quite reassuring. I'm reassured by hearing you say those things. Then the main other point question I had was about the Chief Exec's office, about the increased election costs that hadn't been anticipated, but it looked like maybe they'd not been anticipated. And I just wondered about next year, because we're expecting 2 election cycles next year. Have those increased election costs been factored into our budget planning for next year? Do you know?
Yeah, I think there was. I think it was the timing of the extra duties required there was a change in legislation and additional requirements coming into the elections in May. So I think the team needed the additional capacity, but then there was also additional costs in hiring the equipment and everything, and to meet those new requirements. And there was a small grant, but it didn't cover the full cost. So that has now been identified as a budget requirement going forward into next year, in terms of those extra costs that they've identified of running an election, and I guess that would, in terms of the elections next year, and if it's a local election, obviously it comes from the council's budget. any general election, there is a grant that comes, and costs are covered from central budgets.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor King. So I'll just clarify that point about, I think, what I made on the Q1 report. I think that the point which I was making when I said what I said, I don't think I quite said it's normal. I think the point I was making is that every year since I was elected, I think bar 1 year, there's been a projected overspend. And I think the point which I made is it begs to question how realistic is the budget when it's set, because I can get my crystal ball out, and I'm 99% sure that next year we'll be in this position. We'll be predicting an overspend, or we'll be projecting an overspend in adults and children by about £5 million. Because that's what happens every year. So I think the point which I made at the last meeting was, okay, well, if this is going to be a thing moving forward in subsequent years, if we can predict these overspends, then do we need to build that into the budget and then increase the budget position by, 5 million for children, 5 million for adults, for sake of argument, and then we can cut our cloth accordingly. I think that's the point I was making with regards to those points. Councillor Barnes?
Thank you, Chair. Just going to apologise, I've got a bit of a cough, so I do go on mute. It might be that. I think if we look at that, if we look at this and we look at the two key, which is adults and CYP, these are a lot of statutory requirements, and there's very little that we can do about this in the main. There are certain things, but I think there's a few things that I just wanted to pick up on, which is prevention and early help in adults is 500,000 variance. So I'm just concerned that we're not spending enough on prevention and early help, and we all know the benefit of prevention in the long run. So I think that's a point that isn't mentioned, unless I missed it in there, as to why we're suddenly running at £500,000 under variance on that. Understand the legal and democratic. I sit on other committees like audit, and that was, a lot of that was explained to us. Going through from SYP, and then I think we look at the other one, which I'm slightly concerned about, is some of the other ones in terms of CAFM spend of the regeneration strategy projected, which is 1.1 million markets. How are we going to bring these into a position of where we are going to be revenue or neutral in the budget? I mean, there are some concerning comments about we don't seem to have budgeted properly in terms of bereavement services, which is well under budget. Did we not know that other local areas were bringing our bereavement services in place? So I think there are some figures here which need a little bit more depth of, other than the headline figures. The headline figures we can do nothing about, as I said, in the main. But some of these others, we should really be, I think we should be having a little bit more detail on. And really, I'm concerned that we seem to be robbing Peter in terms of prevention to pay Paul, and that's going to have a long-term effect on us. So I don't know do we know why that is?
So I think in terms of that deeper dive, Councillor Barnes, I've not got the full detail in terms of the operational service issues. In some respects, I know services have been sort of re-looking and rebasing their budgets in terms of understanding where the costs are, and sort of those. They are managed, they are reflected in terms of the headings there are the linked to the accountabilities in terms of the management structure. So there might be more things in prevention, and early help than just prevention and early help that's creating the underspend.
Becky, can I interrupt? Can I just
Yeah.
interrupt? And it was probably wrong of me to ask you to have that side, and I do apologise for that. Ben, could we put this on a flag for us to have a look at in adult health into a bit more of a deeper dive, possible?
Yep, no problem.
Thank you, Becky. And I'm sorry, I didn't really mean you to go into the pounds, shillings, and pence. I am revealing my age there, folks. For those who don't know what pounds, shillings, and pence are, but so thank you, Chair.
Absolutely, Councillor Dacre.
Thank you. So I just wanted to talk about what you were saying, Councillor Robinson, about how realistic is the budget and can't we predict? I think the problem is you can't predict how many children are going to be need to be taken into care and need to be housed. You can't predict. You can do some prediction with adult disabled, because you can, and this is now happening. They are working much more closely with children and young people so that they know who's coming through the age groups and who is going to end up requiring that adult care. And that's one thing that has happened in the last year or two, is that those two directorates have worked much more closely together. And so now adults have got a better idea of what is coming their way, and that might enable them to budget slightly more accurately. But in relation to how many older people might need care, again, you can do some demographic work, but you don't actually necessarily know how many of those people are going to need what sort of care. So it's actually quite difficult to fix those budgets. And the other point is that, and this I think it was the value of the work that they did in children and young people's scrutiny, where they asked them to look at the budgets and try to allocate the budget. And I think what the members of the scrutiny board discovered was it doesn't matter how you cut that amount of cloth, there simply was not enough to go round. So if you decided that you thought that there were going to be X plus 10 number of children coming into care next year, and therefore you needed to spend more, you can't find that within children and young people because their budget wouldn't allow it. You'd have to take it from other parts of the budget in other directorates, and of course they haven't got it either. So it just isn't as simple as we would like it to be. There are some issues where we are trying to look at what the amounts in the budget should be. So what income we might expect from a certain area, where we perhaps can do better predictions based on what's happened in the previous years. But in relation to the really big statutory spends, it's not always easy to predict. And Councillor Barnes, yes, I think it's as you say, really, some of these questions about the detail of what's going on in the directorates really needs to be addressed to the directorates themselves. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a good point, and I appreciate the fluid situation of this and the difficulty at which we can predict what the expenditure is going to be, especially in relation to those services. I think that's a really good point. It's just, I think this was one of the very first comments I made at when discussing the budget in the first year I was elected, and I couldn't quite understand why in the previous year, if we've used reserves essentially to fund a deficit and to fund a shortfall, I couldn't quite then understand that when we were looking at the budget for the subsequent year, it was either the same value or it was less than the previous budget. Because in my possibly naive view, but if there is a shortfall, then that would indicate that the budget needs to go up. So I think that was just my indicative view But I have got a question on the reserves position. On the incredibly useful slideshow, which is entitled our reserves position. It says under the reserve category corporate, it says that the balance brought forward is 30 mil, and the committed and impact from the forecast is 14 mil. But then the projected overspend is 6.6 mil. Now, this might just be me being incredibly thick, but I was just wondering, could we get some clarifications on those figures?
Do you want me to answer this one, Becky?
Yeah, well, if possible, Lee.
Yeah, so basically, in the first quarter monitor, we identified some reserves which we could put towards the overspend. So some of those were already brought out and assumed within our forecast. What we're now assuming is we're going to have to use some more reserves. So the second quarter assumes that the bottom line problem of the budget, which is 6.6 million, now has to come from reserves. So that's why the figures got up from quarter one to quarter two. So that's why it's 14 million.
Right,
Does that answer
okay.
your question, Chair? Or...
So is the actual overspend then for this year 14 mil?
The 14 million it's built up of a few things. It's partly to do with the overspending, partly to do with use of reserves which are being planned to do.
Sorry, Lee, I can't quite hear you. Sorry, Lee, as you.
Yeah, it's built up of a few things. It's partly to do with the overspend and partly to do with use of reserves which are anticipated we're going to spend on certain things. So it's not fully the overspend. And you mentioned another point earlier on about what we're going to do in next year's budget. So what we've assumed as well in MTFP, which works the same cabinet as the revenue monitor.
Sorry,
I wonder, is it anything to do with Becky,
yeah.
I think you're not on mute. Might that help?
Yeah, could be. Perfect. Thank you. Sorry, Lee. We're struggling to, the vacant looks weren't because of what you were saying. We just couldn't hear you. So apologies for that.
So just pick up on your other point, Chai, about the going forwards and what we can do about the budget. And what we're saying is that the MTFP that went to the same cabinet as the revenue monitor, that now assumes this overspending we have, the underlying overspend within the revenue monitor this year is built into the base budget for next year. So that brings us up to a level which should, in theory, mean at that point we shouldn't be overspending or underspending next year. Obviously, everything's okay in theory, and things change. Councillor Dacre mentioned, the extreme cost of some children coming out of care into adulthood, and the cost of their placements. I've just got an example here. In the last few weeks, there's been 2 new placements for direct payment clients, and the cost of those is £4,000 each per week. So you can quickly see, you just need a few more of those, and you're into the millions in terms of adding to the overspends within the monitor. So it's very difficult to keep on top and predict these, but this revenue monitor we've done, it's as good a position as we can get in year, and obviously we've tried to factor it into MTFS, so the budget shouldn't be this far away next year. But obviously what we have to do there is that creates a deficit on the MTFP, so we directors have to go away and find savings to manage that deficit down and balance the budget.
Yeah, absolutely. Just for the sake of clarity, Lee, I'm sorry to ask you to repeat yourself, but could you just repeat yourself on that reserve point, because we couldn't quite hear you due to sound issues.
Yeah, just a second. The That use of reserves it's partly to do with the overspend, partly to do with directors, having some reserves which are from grant funding, which they have to spend on particular programs of work, especially within public health. So it's not all the overspend, but obviously some of it is relating to the overspend.
Right. So, because what I was trying to do is basically work out at what point will we have no reserves left. And I know it's a bit of a how long's a piece of string answer. I know that, because it's predicting, it's presuming, we're going to be overspending next year and then the year after. But I was just wondering, based on this overspend, we're going to have 3 years and then the reserves will be gone. In which case, what do we do then? And I know that's the magic answer. But I was just wondering what your, it's a bit of a harsh question really to ask you, but what are your thoughts on that?
Can I just come in on that? Is that okay, Chair?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, it is a good question, and like I say, we do have reserves for a reason. We've got the general balance that we try and maintain around 5 million, and that is kind of like the ultimate cushion that we would never want to go below. But if things continued on that trajectory, yeah, it's easy to see that the simple maths that in 2 years that there would be no reserve. So that's why it's really important at this next budget to really understand what we need to plan for in terms of a financially sustainable budget that matches the available resources that we've got to us without relying on reserves, albeit we may need some reserves always there to allow for any risks that crop up in year, and so it is really important to understand the cost of different services, different the costs of what we do as a council with our hundreds of things that we do, and understand the things that add most value in that the totality of resources available. And we'll get to see what that resource availability is in the local government finance settlement in December. And just to say, in terms of kind of understanding more detail on all of our funding sources, including reserves, including council tax, government grant, etc., we will be covering that in that scrutiny seminar that's coming up in December, so we can get into some more of that detail.
And yeah, thank you, Becky. And I say this, in the most constructive way possible, because you're looking at the situation Kirklees are currently in, and it's awful. Having to close things left, right, and centre. And in some ways, the problem with the budget process is it just doesn't allow all parties to get around the table and actually collaborate and agree something. And in some ways, I actually do think we're at a point now as a council where it's sink or swim. And at this point, this is where we sort of need to get together and think, okay, how are we going to avoid being in a situation like Kirklees, and ultimately how we're going to avoid a Section 114. So I think that's probably where I am with this. We actually all need to get together and think of a solution to avoid the situation that we don't want to be in. Councillor Thornburg.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for logging on late. So, but no, very detailed document, and first glance you do read what each is these overspends. Everything's an overspend, but one thing I've just pointed out on page 13, I think it is one of them like bereavement services. I think it's the third paragraph down regarding the predicted overspend of 128k. Is it one of them services you would like to think you could cover your costs by raising fees and everything else? I totally agree when it comes to children and young people's, you know, you can't raise money to cover your costs, but such as this, you would like to think you can year on year cover your costs so you wouldn't have this overspend. Am I correct in thinking that way?
Yeah, I think Councillor Dacre, did you want to come in on that one?
Yes, I would. And Councillor Robinson, I've got some other things to say as well. But firstly, just on that point about the bereavement services, and I think it was in last year's budget or the year before, we did substantially raise bereavement charges above the rate that they would normally have gone up by inflation. This is one of those areas where it's not so straightforward, because what we're looking at there is an income target that they were given based upon what it was thought they could earn. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they are not covering their costs. What it simply can mean is that they are not meeting the income target. And at the moment, we are actually charging relatively more than some of the surrounding authorities, I think including Burnley, where a lot of people from where I am in Todmorden may choose to go to Burnley, partly because it's nearer and especially if it's cheaper. So there are, it isn't, I don't think it's an issue of covering costs, it's an issue of meeting income targets. Now, those income targets might have to be adjusted if we cannot bring, if we continue to see that they're not being met. But you have to be careful about how far you raise prices, because, as I say, we're already higher than some are, and we don't want to price ourselves entirely out of the market. Because somewhat to my astonishment, apparently, and many people rely very heavily on their funeral director to guide them as to which cemetery or crematorium they go to. So we have a very good relationship with a lot of them, but if you simply keep putting the prices up, then they're going to tell people go to somewhere else where it's cheaper. Now, it may be that Kirklees have to put their prices up substantially now because they are just so desperate to try to find money from somewhere. But at the moment, that is the position. Can I just go on now to talk about some of those other things, or do you want? I don't see any other hands up, Councillor.
Councillor Dacre.
Yeah. Okay. So I just wanted to go back to the point about reserves and just make stress again that you talked about whether the reserves and the overspend, and I just wanted to remind everybody that the figure of 6.6 million is a projection for the year end. It's not an actual overspend at this moment. And when you look at that slide at page 35, if I can find it again, and it's what Lee said to you, or somebody said anyway, that part of that figure is the reserves that were committed on the last occasion, but part of it is what on that slide, it says impact from forecast. So that's saying if that projected overspend remains the same, then it may be that we have to use those extra reserves, which have made it up to the 14, to bring us back to a balanced position at the end of the year. Now, anybody who was sad enough to watch Cabinet will know that I said when we were introducing this that obviously we know we have to bring this budget in to balance at the end of the year. Reserves is one way. Other drastic steps can be freezes on non-essential spend. I mean, it's arguable that just about everything that the council does do now is essential, but you can look at whether there are vacancies that you can freeze, whether there is spending that you can simply say to people you can't do that. And those will also, so if the normal steps that directors take every year to try and bring projected deficits down don't work, those are the sorts of things that we would be looking at. And I'd also just, Becky's mentioned the medium-term financial plan, and again in the Cabinet, and in that it does refer to our general balances, which Becky mentioned. And, you'll note that it states in there that we have decided that we can no longer, there was a projected use of some general fund balances in the previous medium-term financial strategy, and it's been decided that those can no longer be risked because it would bring us down potentially below the 5 million. So as an administration, we are very well aware of the need to protect those, what Becky's described as the absolute fallback position. And I suppose I just have to address your point, Councillor Robertson, about how it's time for us all to get round the table and agree something to avoid Section 114. And I know we're not supposed to be political in scrutiny meetings, but the fact of the matter is that Labour are the majority party, and therefore we form the administration. And it's our responsibility, our privilege, but our responsibility to avoid the 114, to ensure that to help and work with officers to make sure that this year's budget is brought in as a balances at the end of the year, and that we set a balanced budget for next year, and that we plan to try to make the council robust and sustainable. And that's how politics with elections and it works. So I'm afraid that I wouldn't necessarily say that it's appropriate for all parties to get round the table at this stage.
That's an interesting note to I mean, it's interesting. Me who's arguing that it's all our responsibilities, but then Councillor Dacre arguing that it's Labour's responsibility. I think we are at a time now when we do start needs, and I know. Let's speak frank. You know, the council need more money. Let's speak quite candidly about when the figures don't stack up. They don't stack up, and they stack up because we need more revenue. You know, that's the position. But we are where we are, and we're in a position where, you know, this is our house, and we're the ones in charge who need to get it into order. And the reason why I make the point about now's the time to think, okay, how long have we got left, where we actually then need to start thinking, okay, well, it's time to issue the Section 114, and hopefully we can avoid that, you know. But when there are projected overspends in subsequent years, you've got to start thinking, well, that is on the horizon. And then the next question is, how do we then avoid that situation? And to avoid that situation, we are probably in the position where we need to start thinking, okay, certain things have got to go. We can no longer afford to provide the level of service which we do provide. You know, right or wrong, that's the honest truth. So that's why, in some ways, by having this discussion is helpful, because it's starting to hopefully allow members to think, okay, we are in this position. How are we going to contribute to resolve it? And I think it's probably a good time to have that discussion. Councillor Dickinson.
Thank you, Chair. Again, apologies on my part as well for my lateness. I left a message on your voicemail. I don't know if you got it in time, but and hopefully someone gave apologies for me before the meeting started. Section 114, not something we want to really go down the road of. What might that look like? And is it worth starting to plan for that if we're looking at that inevitability in a couple of years from now anyway? It's just that we maxed up the increase in council tax this year again, which is the norm, and we, by all accounts, got a more generous settlement from central government. Correct me if I'm not right there. And there's 5 million coming back, which theoretically shouldn't be part of offsetting the difficulties that we're having in this year's budget. So is it worth considering those sort of 114 measures to be implemented sooner rather than later? Thank you.
That one for probably can't provide an answer to that, really, to be honest.
Right.
Well, I can.
Oh, Councillor Day.
Okay, go on. Yeah.
I didn't want.
The answer is we certainly are not planning for a 114. We're planning to do everything in our power to avoid the bloody thing. And now that part of that is about steps that have been taken over, and as again I said this in Cabinet, over the last few years to cut things, if you like, to shut buildings, to stop doing things that were not necessarily popular at the time, but have put us in a better position than some other councils who just didn't want to take those difficult steps. We didn't embark on an investment spree, leaving us with hideous problems as some councils have done. We have been, when we've used reserves, we have recognised that it should be to try to plug a gap on a one-off occasion, but that we can't just keep on using them for the same thing each year, which I think, again, some councils have fallen into the trap of doing because they haven't wanted to face up to difficult decisions. But what is true, as Councillor Robinson says, is that the time it's already past us because we've already had to stop doing some things that we would like to do. But it is likely that we will have to stop doing more things. And when Councillor Dickinson says that the settlement last year was more generous, it's true to say that it was slightly more generous than previous settlements, but it in no way at all made up for over a decade of swinging cuts to local authority budgets. So it kept us on an even keel just about, but it does not put us back in the position that we were over a decade ago. And so I'm always saying this, but at the beginning of the year, I went to a local government finance meeting where the general view was that we would be all right this year and we'd be all right next year because we were told that the settlement was going to be, the 2-year settlement were going to be roughly similar. And everybody thought councils would be okay. The problem was going to occur the year after that when we all fell off a cliff because there were no promises. And in fact, there was a promise of more austerity by that stage. Unfortunately, because of the increased inflation, because of increased demand, because of the increase above inflation for social care, accommodation, councils have just been absolutely hit with the appropriate description for Calderdale is a tidal wave of expense. And so the real crunch has come a year or two earlier than everybody thought it was going to. And at the moment, nobody is seeing any immediate end to those difficulties. So we're back to the fact that, yes, we've got some very difficult times coming up ahead, some very difficult decisions to make. And, but as I say, just to go back to where I started, we are not planning for a Section 114, we're planning how to avoid it.
Well, if I may, Chair, just before, yeah, it's that's kind of what I was trying to get to as well, Councillor Dacre. But I think what also needs to be noted is that this council does consistently get a very good rating in terms of the way that the budgets are operated. I think that does need to be recognised as well. It's about finding solutions rather than actually trying to score points for me, as far as I'm concerned this evening anyway. So, but thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Councillor Barnes?
I think actually between Councillor Dake and Councillor Dickinson, I think they've raised my point in a sense, especially in terms of the auditor's report, which has always come out in terms of the management of the council and the finances. I think, though, what it is important, and this is more to scrutiny members, is I think it's important that when we sit down in the revised approach to look at the budget from scrutiny, we attend it, and I think it's beholden on councillors who sit on these scrutiny meetings, not to sit here in 9 months' time, but actually sit here in whenever it is. I can't remember the date. Ben will probably correct me and admonish me when he next sees me for not having the date. But it is, I think it's imperative that we do that process and go through it. And therefore, and it's also imperative that we actually start telling people the situation as to why these things are happening, rather than just cheap political point scoring, because this is affecting all councils, and the impact is dire on all councils, and the impact will be dire on residents. So we need to address that, but we also need to make sure that when we sit down at the scrutiny and the budget, when the budget is prepared, is we do it properly and we don't just not turn up. If we don't turn up, we're washing our hands of our responsibility, in my view. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good point. Okay, if there's no further questions, I'd like to thank Becky, Lee, and Calderdale for attending. I think it's been actually a really, really helpful discussion, which paves the way for future discussions. Okay, then on to the next item. In that case, I believe I'm just going to agenda up the work programme. Ben?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Firstly, just picking up on the point Councillor Barnes raised, but the first of the budget seminars is on the 12th of December at the Town Hall. And it would be absolutely brilliant if all members, as Councillor Barnes suggested, attended. I think it would be useful. I think it would be very informative. I know when it was done in CYP that members actually found a real benefit to it, and it enhanced their understanding of the process and the decisions that have been made, as we've heard reference tonight. As usual, in terms of the work programme, if members have any particular topics that they wish to raise or put on the work programme, if they let me know, and I will do my best to get them on to the work programme. And further, Councillor Barnes, I've noted your comments about getting something on the AHSC Scrutiny Board work programme, and I'll pick that up with you offline after when we meet in the next couple of days.
Perfect. Is that okay, members? Any questions for Ben? No. Well, in that case, good. Close of meeting. In that case,
Sorry, Chair. Just before we go, this is actually a question for Ben. Do you have my phone number by chance?
Yes.
Would you mind giving me a call?
Bit forward.
I know. I mean, I can't help myself sometimes. Ben, would you mind giving me a call after this meeting, and we'll have a chat?
No problem.
Whoa!
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you for Ben.
Yeah. Thank you.
Perfect. Very good. Councillor Carney. So we can't quite hear you. I don't know if anyone else.
It's the best I've ever heard him speak, Chair.
It's looking like, Councillor Kearney, it's looking like your mic is not working. Oh, yeah, we can hear you.
Like the mic on my laptop's not working, but earlier on,
yeah,
this restarted, so it went back to the default. Anyway, I was a bit slow on my mouse when you were asking if there was any questions to do with the work programme. But I'd sent in an idea for an item, but I don't know how long these things take to sort of make their way on.
Can I just very quickly respond to that, Chair? Councillor Kenny, I have emailed you suggesting a meeting about that.
Well, recently?
When you raised the issue with me, yes, I have.
I thought we had that. Did we not have a chat?
No.
Oh.
I will resend you the email after the meeting.
Right, okay.
I think it was a good suggestion though for an item. So I think probably explore it offline, and then we'll bring it back to the board with a concrete suggestion. I think. Anything else, members? No. Well, in that case, thank you very much for attending, and we'll see each other next week in one room at full council. So, and I look forward to seeing you then. But have a good